Hi there. In this 9th video, in the basic series, I'm going to show you how to work with the histogram, what it is, as well as how to work with the levels feature in Photoshop. Okay, how to understand the histogram. It's basically showing you the dynamic range of your photo and how much of the image is being represented in what part of the dynamic range. Confused yet? Well, if you are, let me explain. The dynamic range, what is it? Whether you're using a film camera or a digital camera, every time you make a combination of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, you have a dynamic range to work with for the image. Anything too low, underexposed, will just turn out black. Anything too high, overexposed, will just turn out white. And everything in between is what is called your dynamic range. It's the brightness range you have to work with to capture most of your image. And that's what the histogram is. That's exactly what it is. It's showing you that range, that window. Off to the left is the lowlights, the shadows. Near the middle is the midtones. And over to the right is the highlights, the bright spots. Okay, so what are we actually seeing? Well, in this type of a histogram, where I'm seeing all three colors at once, it's kind of showing me something called luminosity, and it just means the brightness of the image. And so what we have at the left is black, at the far right is white, and it's a gradation in the middle, so it goes from black to a dark gray, light gray, kind of a lighter gray, all the way up to white. In terms of brightness. And so in my picture, you can see it starts off and then boom, it shoots up. So there's a lot of part of the photo in the lowlights, in the shadowy regions. It goes down, there's another peak. So there's a lot of detail in the shadow region. And then the midtones, they taper off as they get brighter, and the highlights keep tapering off until it reaches the very end where there's a sharp spike. And a sharp spike at either end means it's outside of the dynamic range, so it just turned up as white or as black if it was to the left. In my case, the spike is to the right, so part of the image is overexposed. What can you do? Okay, that's kind of what the histogram is. And as I look at this photo of three girls, you can see that the dynamic range, all the way from black to white, is filled. You can see black stuff all along. So there's really nothing that can be done in terms of a mass edit. It's pretty good. It was exposed properly. That's nice. Let me show you another picture. Here I have another picture. It's some snow, a fence, and some brush. You can just look at it and see. It's too bright. There's no dark stuff to it. Well, you can quantify this with the histogram. Just look. There's a lot of stuff over to the right. That's the highlights, the whites. There's a fair amount of stuff in the midtones. That's probably the fence and the brush. But if you look over here, where the darks, the shadows would be, it's pretty much non-existent. And so effectively, your dynamic range starts right around here and works up. And when you have a limited dynamic range, it just doesn't look as good. It doesn't look as contrasty. It doesn't pop. Well, what you would like to do is actually stretch this image so that it fills the entire dynamic range. You want to stretch it into the shadow region so that there becomes darkness. And you can do that using the levels tool. Let me show you how to do that. I have my image. I go to Image, Adjustments, Levels. And now the levels tool is essentially the histogram. I have 3 main controls here. One for the shadows, one for the midtones, and one for the highlights. I want to compress the image so that the shadow region starts right about where this is, right here. And it's very simple to do. All I do is I take this dial for the shadows and I move it over until it reaches about here. And so let me do that. I just click and drag, and I let it go right about there. You can see my histogram is now changed. And let me unpreview that. Instantly it looks dull, it looks washed out. It looks overexposed a little bit. Preview it, and now instantly it looks like it was properly exposed. Wow. Photoshop is magic sometimes. I like it, so I click OK. That's an easy way to adjust the shadow region. But I have another picture down here. Let me open that up. Picture of a campus. It looks really, really nice. And if I didn't look at the histogram, I wouldn't have known for any better that it is missing detail in the highlights. But you just look at the histogram, and you can see most of the image is contained here, all around here, but then it pretty much just cuts off right here. So it's not filling up the whole dynamic range in the highlights. Again, I can use the levels tool to do the very similar thing, to stretch it out into the highlight region. So let me do that. Image, adjustments, levels. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the highlights down to about where they begin. So let me pull that down to about there. It's compressing the dynamic range. And now if I unpreview that, you can instantly see it looks a lot darker. If I preview it now, the clouds look a lot whiter, even the buildings look lighter. So it looks much better exposed now. I like it, so I click OK, and there you go. If you're unfortunate and your picture is missing information in the shadows and the highlights, well, you can do an image adjustments levels, and you can actually adjust both controls, once for the shadow and once for the highlights, at the same time. And so you can compress the dynamic range so that your image takes up the whole dynamic range, and it looks a lot more contrasty and a lot more properly exposed, even though it really wasn't. Well, I hope this gives you a brief introduction to the histogram and how to work with levels in Photoshop. Okay, hope it was helpful.